Good morning and welcome to the Buffalo Niagara Partnership Capital Conversations event, which today is virtual, live from my kitchen. I'm Dottie Gallagher, President and CEO of the partnership. As you may know, Capital Conversations are designed to give partnership members the opportunity to better understand our key advocacy issues, or like today, to hear from one of Western New York's leading public officials. We are so pleased Congressman Brian Higgins could join us today to discuss federal action related to the COVID-19 pandemic and what he thinks Washington, D.C. needs to do next. Capital Conversations are a part of our Government Affairs series, and that programming would not be possible without the support of our sponsors, who I'd like to acknowledge. Our title sponsor, Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Western New York. Our presenting sponsors, AT&T, Charter Communications, and National Grid. Our event sponsors, Delta, National Fuel and Waste Management. Our print sponsor, Zenger Group, and our supporting sponsors, Labella Associates and Niagara University. Just some brief housekeeping here. Some of you submitted some questions, many of you submitted questions in advance, but some of them were very technical. And what we've done is, if you don't hear your question asked or answered today, we will be responding, the BNP Business Link team will be responding personally to each of your questions, so they will get answered. It's now my pleasure to introduce Congressman Higgins. Congressman Higgins represents New York's 26th Congressional District, which includes portions of Erie and Niagara counties. In the 116th Congress, Congressman Higgins is a member of the powerful House Committee on Ways and Means and serves on the Subcommittee on Health, Trade, and Social Security. Congressman Higgins also sits on the House Budget Committee. We know Congressman Higgins as a fierce advocate for the development of Buffalo's waterfront, the need for robust infrastructure investment, and co-chair of the Northern Border Caucus, giving Buffalo Niagara's strategic location and integrated economy with Southern Ontario. Congressman Higgins, we are so pleased to have you with us here today, so welcome.
Thanks, Debbie. Thank you for having me.
So why don't you give us some insight on sort of what's happened to date with the CARES Act and what you think is working and maybe what's not working as well as it should?
Yeah, I think, the unfortunate aspect of this is that as a nation, we weren't prepared for it. And we had warning signs going back almost 20 years. We have a government mandated virtual shutdown of a $22.5 trillion economy, 70% of which is consumption. There are 75,000 Americans dead. There are 2 million Americans that have COVID-19. The number of dead increases by 2,000 every day. By August, the 75,000 number of deceased will likely double. We have no treatment and we have no vaccine, obviously, that would have prevented this from occurring, despite the fact that nearly 20 years ago, the World Health Organization had declared that the coronavirus was the cause of SARS, severe acute respiratory syndrome, and then later MERS, Middle East respiratory syndrome. My point is simply this, that we should be investing in the National Institutes of Health to develop an effective vaccine, because while we were warned that the coronavirus was going to come back, we also know that it's going to be with us for a long time. Not only the new coronavirus that we're dealing with now, the virus that causes the disease, COVID-19, but it's really a function of population growth. There are 7.8 billion people living on the globe. That will increase another 500 million over the next 5 years. And what happens is when you have population growth, you need more places to put people. And what's happening is you're interacting, in many cases, destroying ecosystems where mammals that carry the virus live, and they're coming into closer contact with human population. Now, it is very likely that this coronavirus came from a bat in a wet market in China. And bats are about 20% of all non-human mammals on the globe. And there's 1,300 different species of bats, but they carry the virus, but for some unknown reason, they are asymptomatic. So when the human population comes in contact with bats, That's how this disease or the virus is spread. So, where are we at? The only thing that we can do, because we weren't prepared for this with a treatment or a vaccine, is to encourage people to social distance. And I'm amazed at the discipline of the people of Western New York and throughout our country and throughout the world, really, who have complied pretty well with those admonishments that we've received from public health officials. But the other concern, Dottie, is this, that even Dr. Fauci, who I think most people admire, he has served in both Republican and Democratic administrations in this capacity as an infectious disease public health expert. He's telling people that there could be a vaccine for this by September. That's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. Drug development, we know this because of Roswell Park in Huffman Woodward. We announced a $600,000 grant to Huffman Woodward yesterday, 3 different grants to do research on COVID-19 toward the goal of developing a treatment or a vaccine. The concern when announcements like that are being made, it conveys to people that this is going to be over with soon. And that's just not the case. The influenza of 1918 was with us for 3 years. It started in December of 1917 and ended in 1920. There were 3 different waves of it in the spring, the fall, and then again in the winter. Now, we don't know that this is a seasonal virus, but if it is, that could pose potential problems moving forward. So, we spend $700 billion this year on defense, and we can't marshal the federal resources to get face masks for nurses and for doctors. We don't have ventilators in good supply. We don't have testing kits to really know fundamentally the extent of this spread, which is highly problematic. And we only spend $40 billion a year on research through the National Institutes of Health, despite the fact that the NIH is the largest funder of medical research in the entire world. So I just think what's been revealed here is the fragility of the American economy and of American society. And I think as a good outcome, and I think we will have a good outcome, it should be a more equitable, healthier, and safer America and the world.
Well, I certainly hope so. I mean, honestly, when you look at just the change in everyone's life, it was just almost inconceivable that we would be where we are right now. And Americans certainly are resilient, and hopefully we will be able to get through on the other side. What we at the partnership are extremely concerned about are our local businesses and the economic impact of this, people losing their jobs and all those things I know you know about. And the CARES Act, I mentioned to you earlier, we did a survey of Western New York businesses just April 14th. We wanted to wait until the CARES Act came out so that we would kind of know where the gaps would be and that we could begin to address the gaps. And we have a little bit of insight into that right now, but I guess it would be really interesting for us to hear from you, Congressman, about the CARES Act from your perspective. How well is it working, and sort of, what do you think's not working as intended?
I think, typically, what comes out of Congress is something that is large and highly imperfect, and this is no exception. Last year, for the entire fiscal year in 2019, the Small Business Administration administered 58,000 loans representing $28 billion. This year, really in a period of 12 weeks, 6 million loans representing $525 billion, just to show you the scale of the current problem. Congress could be doing much better. We basically approved, a massive infusion of cash into the economy, as I said, in a highly imperfect way. I will say this, in talking directly with some of the SBA leading lenders in this community, They did an outstanding job with very little guidance from Treasury and SBA to get this program up and operational. And of course, it's a program that's intended to get money into the hands of individuals because, you know, the size of our economy, the fact that it's 70% consumption requires the stabilization of it by empowering people to engage in economic activity. At the same time, we're encouraging social distancing, a very, very difficult thing to do. And as you know, these are always subject to negotiations. The House is Democratic, the Senate is Republican, and the President is Republican. So each, entity in that decision-making process has their priorities, and all of those differences have to be reconciled before you actually vote on a bill that can become law. So that's how it works. It is a highly imperfect process. It is not as efficient as it should be, but I think that it met the objective, generally speaking, of getting as much cash out into the economy, despite the fact that we've gone through this severe economic contraction. It is estimated that we lost in the past 12 weeks $5 trillion in income in the United States. So we continue to go back at it. I think the first one, there were a lot of things in there relative to the Paycheck Protection Program, the individual grant going to people. I think the unemployment piece had a good intent. I don't know that, that may have served as a disincentive for some people, small businesses, to bring their people back because they could do better with unemployment, particularly given the federal piece. So whatever the state gives you in unemployment insurance, the federal government added an additional $600 per week, which is very, very significant. But again, it was intended to get money into the hands of people so that they would spend it to create demand in an economy where demand was severely contracted.
Yeah, we're hearing about I think there's even a question about it. We do get that feedback from employers that who need essential workers, that extra $600 has just made it a little unattractive to, and it's not just about the money, and it's not just about the wages. It's because people will argue, well, that's about low wage workers. It's not. It's that people are nervous about being in public, right? And so, they're making these decisions based on, their own perceptions of their own health and safety as well.
But Dottie, I would tell you this, and it's an important point, that if you are, if you are offered a job and you reject it to collect unemployment, that's fraud, unless there are extenuating circumstances like daycare and other issues that keep you from accepting that job. So, people that are, you're dealing with this kind of money, you're dealing with a crisis situation, there's always going to be a tendency for people to try to game the system, but they should be very careful about, what it is they do. And, we had, you mentioned yesterday on WBFO about the vulnerability of small businesses and sole proprietors. And our community is made up of a lot of those individuals that are very important components of our local economy, but the national economy as well. The service industry, and I know that there's some questions about that as well, are getting clobbered more so than anybody else. We've lost 406 million jobs. The service industry alone, hospitality, restaurant, etc., 16 million jobs. So,
well, and there's so many parts of this in restaurants, and we know that that's probably, as sectors go, tourism and restaurants in general are really, really, really struggling. And one of our survey respondents pointed out something I did not know, which is that when a restaurant closes for a period of time and they have to reopen, they have to buy all that inventory, right?
Yeah.
So, it's like starting over. Like I would not, I mean, it's obvious when you think about it, but I hadn't thought about it. So for some of them, even if the customers are willing to come back, they may not have the cash flow to be able to do that. So, Congressman, we're trying to organize that and really work with our economic development partners to say maybe we should relook at policies around retail and all of that in terms of economic development, because we're going to have to help these folks get back in business. So,
Dottie, to your point, I was, the Vukovic family, great people, Gene Vukovic, have tried distributing, and you just learn so much about what happens in a severe situation as we're experiencing now. They were literally going and picking up beer that they had delivered to restaurants and businesses, because that beer now has to be destroyed
I
because
know.
it's not being used. And you find that with the dairy industry, and now, with oil prices and gasoline, it's a very similar situation. It's incredible what you learn about the interworkings of both small, medium, and large businesses during a time of national emergency. We've not experienced anything like this. I mean, people hearken back to the Great Recession or the Depression, the Great Depression. But this is very different because we don't have treatments, we don't have a vaccine. We have an acute public health crisis that has to be abated before we even begin the process of trying to rebuild a $22.5 trillion economy. So we have to flatten the curve, we have to bend the curve, but we really have to try to crush the curve as best we can. And that's when you will see, I think, later stages of economic recovery that are exclusively stimulus, because what we're dealing with right now is really disaster relief.
Mm. Well, and I mean, this, but when we have a disaster, it's usually sort of geographically contained, right? Or and this is, everyone is experiencing it, so it is super challenging. I will commend you and all of our federal officials for really putting together the CARES Act and getting it out as quickly as it got out, and then to refunding it just showed the scale of the need. And there are some imperfections in the PPP program around the timing and businesses that are not currently able to do business, and which we can talk about. But so tell me from your perspective, what should Washington? What are you thinking of? What's next in terms?
Yeah, I suspect, Dottie, in conference calls yesterday with the leadership of the House and my committee, the House Ways and Means Committee, I'm also on the Budget Committee as well. I suspect that we will be coming up with a bill, the Constitution, Article 1, Section 7, all appropriations bills in the United States Congress originate out of the House. So we are exercising that constitutional authority and coming up with a bill. Right now, the focus is on state and local governments, but direct aid to state and local governments. They're taking a hit, as you know, both on the revenue side and they're incurring expenses directly related to the coronavirus, COVID-19. At the 11th hour, sadly, they were kicked out of the last bill, primarily by a senator from Kentucky, who is also the majority leader. And, to play this red state, blue state thing like it's a board game is highly irresponsible. What we need is national leadership and national solidarity. We are all in this together. So every aspect, we talk about the size of the American economy. We are 5% of the world's population and 23% of the world's economy. We have the largest economy in the history of the world, but it's a public-private economy. And every aspect, every component part of this economy has taken a hit. So if the federal government is going to be provided relief as the last resort, we have to do that in a fair and equitable way. New York State gives the federal government about $40 billion every year. The state of Kentucky, because it's the third most impoverished state in the nation, takes $25 billion every year. So if we want to talk about deficits, maybe we should look at that deficit in terms of balance of payments. But we're a strong nation and we look after our weakest component parts. So we accept that we share benefits and burdens for the good of all of us. I think that's true generally as an American principle, but I think it's particularly true now in this time of declared national emergency. So I suspect that we'll see $1 trillion, maybe a $2 trillion bill, but $1 trillion for state and local governments, which would provide direct aid to the state of New York for its coronavirus expenditures and loss of revenues. Same is true for the county of Erie, the city of Buffalo, the towns, the villages, and the school districts, because all of them are employers. All of them provide essential services. And if they don't have revenue coming in to support their services, they have to balance their budgets. And that would be mass layoffs, which is the last thing you want in an economy that needs demand to grow and to then stabilize so that we can get on later. Right now, we don't have the luxury of rebuilding. What we're doing, as I said before, is a natural disaster. And of course, we'll continue to provide funding for hospitals. Our hospital community in Western New York, I think, has done an extraordinary job. They ramped up, knowing that it was very difficult to get the kinds of things that they would need, but all of them have been highly professional, highly efficient, and highly committed to making sure that our healthcare infrastructure in Western New York was ready for this. And I think they've all have done an outstanding job. So I think the best thing that the federal government can do is recognize that we, the federal government, need to provide the resources to the state and localities and the institutions like hospitals and healthcare centers to help us through the public health crisis, to abate the COVID-19 so that we can get back to a semblance of normalcy, and then concurrently, try to find treatments that are effective. But all of that will take time. Unfortunately, medical research, particularly drug development, treatments, and vaccines, innovation is inefficient. It's trial and error. There are always more losses than there are wins. And if you look at the major treatments for things like cancer, Parkinson's, and Alzheimer's, they were developed 20, 30 years ago. So they're not all that effective. And I think that is another argument for a massive investment in the National Institutes of Health to find more effective treatments and vaccines for those diseases that I spoke of, but also for the coronavirus.
So can you take some questions from our members? Would that be okay?
Certainly.
Are we ready? All right.
Yep.
So
I will do my best. Yeah.
I know you will. Our first question is from Tony Spada from the AAA. Will you fight to have mid-sized companies with more than 500 employees qualify for the PPP so we don't have to lay people off?
I will. And actually, I had a discussion last night with members of my committee on this very issue. I mentioned earlier, Tony, that there are 40.6 million jobs lost. Small business is 6 million. That's about 20% of all small businesses in the country. Medium-sized businesses is 5.3. Large businesses are 9 million. As I mentioned previously, the service industry is 16 million and 4.3 million in manufacturing. I am taking this list with me in any discussions that I have with House leadership, the Speaker, the Majority Leader, and the Chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, as well as the Chairman of the Budget Committee, to emphasize that we need to address directly this job loss in the immediate sense, but also longer term, to provide all of these various sized businesses with the kind of support we're going to need them to provide us in order to stabilize and then grow this economy.
Thank you. Paul Tokaz from M&T Bank and Jolyn Hill from the Albright Knox Art Gallery asked essentially the same question. And I'm curious about this myself. Are we likely to see a future infrastructure stimulus package? And how ambitious will you think it will be?
I do. I think, unfortunately, this crisis, we had to endure this, or we are enduring this, to highlight the need for it. We are behind. I suspect it'll be a $2 trillion bill. And just to give you historical context, the New Deal was done in 3 iterations, 33, 34, and 36. And it was $41 billion then. It is $675 billion in today's dollars. So you're seeing potentially a stimulus bill that will be 3 times the size of that. I think it will present great opportunities for Buffalo and Western New York. It's been desperately needed for a long time. The last time we did a major infrastructure bill was 2005. And our roads and bridges have deteriorated, and we need an infusion of help to help the economy grow and grow more efficiently. And having outdated infrastructure has a negative impact on economic growth. But it's also the jobs that you're able to create, because the one thing that we've learned also during this, we have really had, despite good unemployment numbers pre-COVID-19, we have not had 3% growth. Last time we had 3% growth was 2005. And in order to deal with the debt and deficit that we will be dealing with because of all of this COVID-19, we have to produce an economy that's going to grow at 3.5% to 4%, much like it did in the 1990s. And it grew 4% each year over an 8-year period. And we didn't have a budgetary surplus. In fact, we had a $300 billion budgetary, we didn't have a budgetary deficit. We had a budgetary surplus of $300 billion. And so I think growth and investing in the kinds of things, infrastructure, scientific research, and education, those are the things that will grow the economy to the level we're going to need it to grow over the next decade.
That's encouraging. Brian Pleben from the Hamister Group wants to know what provisions are being made for PPP loan forgiveness for those businesses that are unable to meet the employment thresholds for forgiveness given the lack of demand for their product, such as hotels and restaurants, et cetera.
Yeah, when I talk about the imperfection of the CARES Act, that's one of them. I think that it was thrown together quickly, given the emergency circumstances surrounding COVID-19. And I think that's an area that is currently under review very aggressively to address those kinds of issues.
So are you seeing that as an amendment to for the people who have those loans right now, or a change for the future?
Both. I think we're looking at retroactivity to help people achieve the objective of the program. It doesn't do us any good if a business that applied for this and received funding yet can't utilize it to its fullest extent, because we in Washington need the help of small businesses to create that demand that's not there. So I think this is one of the things that has been revealed in the Paycheck Protection Program, that perhaps having to put it together so quickly, we overlooked some aspects that need to be corrected, and I will be pushing to make those corrections retroactive. Maybe it shouldn't be 75% for employee retention. Maybe it should be 50%. And there are other, expenses that these businesses are incurring, that they need help with in order to stay viable, because the viability of businesses during this difficult time is very, very important, because small businesses are huge employers, as we just found out with our review of what aspects of the economy are being so damaged. So yes, and we're going to try to make it retroactive. Good question.
We have a second question from the Hamister Group, from Dan Hamister. Why isn't Congress passing a forbearance to all mortgages, including CMBS debt, I don't know what that is, for the next 90 days with specific guidance of how to deal with the missed payments, taking them to the end of the loan?
Yeah, this has been a big problem that to be truthful, I just don't think anybody knew how to deal with it. And we're finding that, if people don't have money because they didn't get their stimulus check, or they can't get their unemployment, they can't pay their rent. I mean, it's really at a very localized level that is being dealt with. And my hope is that we will come up with a component part of the next disaster relief bill that will address fundamentally that issue. That's an issue that we've been hearing quite a bit about. And I'll tell you, these are very valuable, Dottie, because I have staff on. We have answers to a lot of the questions that have been raised. And we are using this as a basis from which to communicate directly to House Ways and Means Committee, senior staff, Energy and Commerce, Financial Services. And these are the folks that are putting at least the draft together for the next bill. So it's very valuable. We've heard some of these concerns before, like this one, and this is a topic of discussion amongst senior staff in Washington, all of whom are working remotely.
That's great. It's good to hear. Lauren Ashburn with the Alzheimer's Association of Western New York is talking now about not-for-profit organizations that are more than 500 employees. And she wants to urge you to establish an exclusive fund to support nonprofit employers with between 500 and 10,000 employees, including loan forgiveness and other provisions, to enable the Alzheimer's Association and other large health charities to continue to effectively serve their constituents' needs. And she's asking for your support on this issue and to follow up with your other members of Congress. And I think, the over 500, this is one of these unintended consequences. You don't think about that scale, not just in for-profit businesses, but not-for-profit businesses. So what would you say to Lauren about her concern?
Lauren, you do a great job with the Alzheimer's Association. I spoke with your national president about this very issue, and I'm communicating that directly to the folks that are actually putting the draft of the bill together. Again, you're an organization that is national in scope. You do great work in all these communities. We sometimes view you as separate entities having jurisdiction over, only Western New York, where these national organizations are doing extraordinary work, and we have to ensure that they are properly taken care of in this time as well. So that's my commitment to you, Lauren.
Thank you, Congressman. You touched on this earlier, but and I don't know if there's anything more you can add to what you've already said, but Carmen Garazzo from Bergman asked actually, how is the federal government intending to support the states, especially New York, to deal with the deficit in which funding for schools, police and fire, as well as critical infrastructure maintenance, while subsidizing industries and corporations? The question is, how big is Axe here, and how do we get that money out?
Well, yeah, as I said, I'm pushing for direct aid. Senator Schumer has been very good on this issue. He has some leverage over in the Senate, and it's direct aid as opposed to going to states and have them administer the money. This would be direct aid to the localities, the school districts, and the state to cover both the loss in revenue because of the coronavirus and the increase in expenses due to the coronavirus as well. And this speaks to a larger issue as well, Dottie. I think that's why it's important to have strong national leadership here. And I think the governor, Andrew Cuomo, has done a very good job. I think the regional governors have done a good job, both Republican and Democratic. But there's a time of national emergency, and repeatedly, all of us have heard about face masks, ventilators, testing kits. The national government, the federal government, should be marshaling the resources that we have to help the states, because the response was delayed. And in an emergency, a national emergency, we don't have the luxury of time. And a response that's delayed is a response that's denied. to people that need help. We created a situation where all of the states were competing amongst each other to try to get face masks, ventilators, other personal protective equipment. The strength of the country is defined when it uses its enormous influence to be doing all of that for the states and just create one entity, whether it's through, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention or the Federal Emergency Management Agency. That's the better entity to do that, as opposed to creating all of this competition. Because I will tell you, in the early days, talking with some of the hospitals and their leaders, they were concerned about testing. They were concerned about personal protective equipment. And the best that we could do for them was simply, call the state and say that, Catholic Health needs this, Kaleida needs this, ECMC needs this. It's just not as good, as efficient and effective basis from which to do all of those things. So we're going to learn from this, but I just think it's a good point to make. But the states, should be taking a lead as they are, because they have public health departments. Take the lead at the state level and the county. I think Mark Poloncarz has done a very, very good job. I think Mayor Byron Brown has done a very good job, and they can communicate and give direction that they're getting from their public health officials, experts, as to what people need to do to mitigate. But again, I keep going back to this: without a treatment or without a vaccine, the best our fragile healthcare system can do is provide what's referred to as support care. Just try to help these people who are struggling, suffering with the malignant consequences of this COVID-19 to a point where they can get to a healthier place. And a nation as strong and as good as ours should be better prepared to take care of its people in a time of a national health emergency, and we were not prepared.
Yeah, clearly we weren't. Don Ingalls from Blue Cross Blue Shield of Western New York is asking, what can be done to bring banks to the table to ensure that businesses, providers, and insurers have liquidity?
Yeah, great question, Don. We're hearing that through the Federal Reserve. They have the ability to pump out a lot of money into the economy to ensure that there is adequate support for businesses, for not-for-profits. We do, when you're in emergency response mode, you're doing a lot of things at the same time. And we provide direct assistance to individuals, but we're also depending on entities to help us do that. So I think the banks have stepped up. I've talked to many of the financial institution leadership of our community. All they were looking for was guidance from the Treasury Department and from the Small Business Administration to be able to do their due diligence about establishing creditworthiness and all those other kinds of things. But there was a timing issue as well. So I think we're learning on the fly here, and each iteration of disaster relief comes with a lot of lessons in humility about what it is. We didn't do as well as we could have, but we use that as a basis from which to try to do better moving forward. So good question, and we're dealing with this, and the Fed is indicated a strong willingness to be helpful in that regard.
Sandy Miller from Canisius College wants to ask you, like most industries, higher ed is experiencing severe economic challenges due to COVID-19. This sector employs thousands of people locally and provides billions of dollars in direct annual economic benefit to Western New York alone and the U.S. economy overall. While the CARES Act has provided, a bit of relief to institutions, the challenges still remain. What type and level of relief will you pursue in the stimulus for colleges and universities?
Yeah, I've talked to a lot of, John Hurley, Father Marr at Niagara University, and many others, both public and private. There is some money in the CARES Act, but not nearly enough. I think there is a tendency to look at, assistance to students and their families, and that is very, very important. But, Canisius College is a large institutional employer in this community. And we depend on the viability of Canisius and other institutions of higher learning to employ our people. It's the profession that makes every other profession possible. The next iteration of the CARES Act, my hope is that there will be a big piece in there for colleges and universities, both public and private, just underscoring the institutional support that is needed for these institutions as employers, as providers of higher education services to the very people that we are going to depend on to be the next generation of leaders. So you have my commitment to continue to advocate for colleges and universities, both public and private. And I think, the good thing is that's coming from throughout the nation as well. So it's obviously a problem here in Western New York, but it's a problem throughout the state and throughout the country as well.
This is a little bit more of a specific question from Steve Carmina at Carmina Woods Morris. How are we doing with the historic tax credit sunset extension?
Yeah, I dealt with Steve, one of Steve's partners, on an important project in downtown Buffalo, or on the periphery of downtown Buffalo. That will have to be done either through the Treasury Department or through statute. But I can't imagine, in this case, this project has to be completed by a certain date. But because you have a suspension of construction activity, at least at this point, those deadlines can't be met. So we are working to get an extension of the historic tax credit provision relative to the completion of the project, and I think we will be successful. We're also, Steve, looking to increase from 20% to 30% for historic tax credit projects that are in targeted areas, disaster areas. This is often part of legislation that provides relief for flooding, for hurricanes, and those kinds of things. And this clearly would fall into that category, perhaps even more so. So I am confident that we will get an extension for your project and other projects that were mandated to cease, so that you can continue to be eligible for the historic tax credit program under this project, and hopefully we will be able to increase it to 30%.
So our next question is from Darren Moscato from Express Employment Professionals, and it's a two-part question. And you sort of, we talked a little bit about this earlier, but I think what Darren wants to know is if we're going to fix it. What's being done to fix the disincentive to work that unemployed workers face from the fact that combined with state and federal unemployment benefits, they earn more on unemployment than they did when they were working? And the follow-up to that is, what is being done to fix the penalty that businesses who use staffing services face when using the PPP? So it's a two-parter.
Yeah, we need to fix the program. Both, the unemployment piece was a train wreck. I mean, you had a situation where, on March 14th, the end of that week, there were like 283,000 new unemployment claims. In the next 3 weeks, there were 10 million. And, we depended on each individual state to administer the program. Obviously, they do not have the physical or human infrastructure to do that. And people, as you know, we get this every single day, are still pursuing, with a great level of frustration, their unemployment insurance. I think that clearly the intent was to get as much money into people's hands as possible. I think the unintended consequences is what you brought up and what you're experiencing is, and that is that unemployment that exceeds the amount that you would earn working has served as a disincentive to bring people back to work. But as I said, if you're offered a job and you are capable of working, and the extenuating circumstances of things like childcare, that's a fraudulent situation under which you could face some consequences later on. So we would encourage people to be very careful about that. And then the PPP program, again, experimental. As I said, we dealt with 58,000 loans last year. Now we're dealing with 6 million in a 12-week period. So a lot of imperfection, and I acknowledge that. And that imperfection will be dealt with, and has been, in the process of being corrected as we move forward. So my hope is the next bill will deal with those two issues directly.
So, Congressman, I know this is a state issue, so I don't know that, but I guess maybe you could weigh in. James Slough from Excelsior Orthopedics wants you to help him make sure that ambulatory surgery centers are included and are part of the reopening plans in New York State. They're a necessary part of elective surgeries today. They've been left off of discussions at the state level. And it was reported today that Catholic Health is starting their elective surgery. So, but I think this is specifically around ambulatory surgery centers. So I don't know if you have anything to add to.
Yeah, what I would do is we can advocate. I have that question here in front of me, and we will advocate with the state as well. I presume that that's a decision that will be made by the New York State Department of Health relative to, what is deemed to be essential in the gradual reopening. And they should try to communicate with them as well. But I will do my part to ensure that these centers that provide emergency services are included in that first wave of reopening.
So this next question is a subject very close to my heart. Patrick Kaler, the president of Visit Buffalo Niagara, is really talking about what's happened in tourism. The tourism industry has been devastated by COVID-19, and recovery is going to be slow for Buffalo and Erie County. And quite honestly, they'll be the last to be coming back online. We know that you signed the U.S. Travel Association letter to support 501c6 organizations like Visit Buffalo Niagara, and by the way, like the partnership, to be included in the next phase of the PPP. Do you feel that the 501c6 inclusion has a chance of passing? We were sort of hopeful this last round, and it didn't happen.
I do, Dottie, and I don't mean to. I just look. I don't. The enormity and the complexity of the American economy has been revealed, and its vulnerability, its fragility, and all aspects of it. And morally, I think we have an obligation. You can't help one person with a stimulus check and then leave the organization that is responsible for promoting Buffalo relative to the tourism economy, dangling out there. I don't see how that,
And Congressman, this is happening to chambers of commerce all over the country, and we are being asked to step up and help businesses prepare to go back to work and create plans for our regions, and we are. I mean, that's why we exist. So it is unfortunate that C6s who do a lot of really good civic work were excluded, and I think are part of the fabric of our community. So that's my own personal little commentary there, but we appreciate your support for that moving forward.
We have to fight to get you and them in future rounds. And as I said, we're talking about potentially a $2 trillion bill that could be voted on within the next week or two. But there will be many other iterations of this out of necessity. Mm-hmm. And unless and until that demand is naturally in the economy, you are not going to have the growth and the stability that's necessary to keep this economy moving. So we're going to have to continue to do stimulus, and the payback will be the growth that we produce once America has been deemed to be safe and healthy from this coronavirus.
next question is going to seem like an insignificant question, but I can tell you from my past experience, whenever there's a backup on the Peace Bridge and my phone starts ringing, that a lot of people are going to care about this question. Bill Hessler from Hannah Commercial Real Estate wants to know, has there been any discussion regarding U.S. citizens who own Canadian property and pay property taxes will be able to access their properties on the other side of the border?
Yeah, there's been no discussion thus far. We're receiving inquiries from people, and we are passing them on that this is a serious concern for people that are in that situation. The bridge is, expected to reopen. It's closed until May 20th. My hope is that we can open it up, if not fully, for more access other than essential services, and give people the opportunity to go over and maintain their properties over there. But this again speaks to the larger issue and relative to tourism. 1/3 of the entire population lives in Southern Ontario. Canadians spend $10 million a year in Western New York on healthcare services. The Buffalo Niagara International Airport is highly dependent on the Canadian traveler, probably 40 to 45%. Our professional sports teams, a good percentage, probably 20%, are season ticket holders from Southern Ontario. Our cultural institutions. I mean, we are an economy that is deeply interdependent in Western New York with Southern Ontario. So, the quicker we can get that border opened up, the better, albeit keeping first and foremost at the forefront the issue of public health.
Well, beyond all those consumer-based interactions, and we did a survey, I was many years ago now, 6 or 7 years ago, about tourism spending. So, the kind of spending you're talking about was $1 billion of economic impact into Western New York from Southern Ontario. And our membership surveys, Congressman, more than a slight majority, and I can't remember the exact number, I think it's 65% of our member companies have either customers or supply chain relationships in Canada. So you're talking about an incredibly integrated economy for the region. So thank you for sharing your thoughts on that.
And Dottie, the other thing is, I just want to bring that up on the interdependence of the Southern Ontario economy and in Western New York. You learn this through, things have changed so much from the original North American Free Trade Agreement, and just the manufacturing process where a item will traverse the border 3, 4, 5, 6 times before it becomes a product. And it just shows you, the fascination with world trade and our relationship between, the United States and Canada, but also the complexity of it. And, the importance of, to the fullest extent possible, recognizing that there are security concerns, but removing the unnecessary delays and promoting the efficient movement of goods and services between Western New York and Southern Ontario.
So our last question, we've got just a couple minutes left here, is from John Baldo, and he's looking for an update on the SBA EIDL loan funding. So not the PPP, but the emergency loan funding through SBA. Is there an update on the funding and distribution process that you can share?
I don't have an update on it. I will get him an update on it this afternoon. And
they had closed. It's closed for new applications and has been for some time, a couple weeks ago. So.
And here's the other thing: we dealt with the state's leadership and the Small Business Administration, and there's still some money left in the last disaster relief that Congress did to replenish, but both the PPP, but the other programs as well. And but it's going fast. It is going very, very quickly. So I will get him a response directly today from my staff.
Okay, thank you, Congressman. Well, I do want to just say thank you to you for everything that you do and everything that you do on behalf of Western New York. And we really appreciate your willingness to get in front of our local business people and really talk through some of the issues that obviously are on their minds. So stay in touch with us and let us know how we can be helpful. And I just, again, I want to express my sincere appreciation for your time today.
Thanks, Nadia, for your leadership, and everybody, thank you. Stay strong, stay safe, and stay well. We'll get through this.
Yes, we will. Thank you, Congressman. Have a great day.